Hello, everyone. Welcome to Shine at 9. 9. Do not adjust your monitor, okay? I know you expected to see pretty Geraldine, but now you only see an old geezer. Me lah, not him. Not him. Me. Well, it's called being a takeover host. That's why Geraldine told me I'm a takeover host. Not that I wanted to take over anything or anyone, but that's the terminology used, uh, which to me is just a surrogate or substitute role. Anyway, I'm live not from my home, but from a studio known as the Humidor. Yeah, it's a very wonderful, wonderful place. You can chill here. You can puff cigar if you want. Um, and this Humidor is actually owned by two of my dear friends, Shafiq and Fong. Unfortunately, they are somewhere here around. But I also have in the studio three special guests, Mr. Dylan Sia, Jobers Lau, and Clinston Ho. Make some noise. Okay. But of course, the superstar of the show tonight is none other than, oh, sorry, Imran Clyde.
Hi,
Okay, Imran, hi. How are you?
I'm good, thanks.
Okay. Let's start by introducing yourself.
All right, sure. My name is Imran Clyde, and I am the Executive Director of Nextdoor Property Communications. And what Nextdoor does is we create, we do integrated campaigns, primarily for developers. And over the last couple of years, we've been involved in placemaking. We've worked with developers. We've done projects with developers on placemaking as well. And yeah, so it's something that we love to talk about. I mean, ultimately, at the end of the day, it's really about public space, how we use public space, and what can we do to improve it in that sense.
Okay, so the topic of tonight's show is the new norm for people and place. And
Yeah.
it's all about place making, right?
Yes.
Not making place, huh? Place making.
No. But it's partly involved as well. So we've put together a couple of slides to sort of explain what placemaking is, why is it important, and how the pandemic is sort of changing the way we approach public space, and what can we sort of do to ourselves to improve public space around us.
Okay, before you start your presentation, how long has this placemaking concept, been around?
Well, it's been around since for quite some time. I believe since the 70s, if I'm not mistaken. But essentially, it's just an approach to how we design, manage, and use public space. So it's really a set of, well, some might say, it's a series of common sense ideas as to how we can sort of improve public spaces. It's new, or relatively new in Malaysia, in the sense that, as a terminology, it's only recently been introduced. But it is very important to the growth of our cities. It's very important in where we live, where we work, where we shop. So yeah, so it has very far-reaching implications.
Okay, we've known each other for quite some time, right? Since when I was back in Iskandar, Malaysia last time. How come
Yes.
you never actually introduced this placemaking to me when I was there?
Well, when we were there, we were already sort of focused more on future cities. If you remember, in those days, Johor, we were talking about more.
Futuristic Iskandar, Malaysia.
Yeah, we were we were talking more about smart cities. Interestingly enough, you can have smart cities integrated into the idea of placemaking. So it's actually just a natural progression. And we feel that at this point in time, placemaking really, I think, has a much bigger impact in terms of how people use space and things like that. So, everybody can enjoy it. It's all about being inclusive. So, if we are talking about migrants, the elderly, how women use space, children, how they perceive and use space, for example, and things like that. So it's something that's for everyone. So that's why we at Nextdoor are so passionate about it.
Okay, I won't hold you back any longer. But
Sure.
for the audience out there, if you have any questions, please put in the comment. Any questions you want to ask? So let's have the presentation by you, Imran.
All right, great. Okay. So yeah, today we are here to sort of talk about the new norm for people and place. So I'm just going to share the screen and it's up. Okay, so I think a lot of questions, the primary question is, what is placemaking? I think that's something that a lot of people are wondering about. So placemaking is a multifaceted approach to the planning, design, and management of public space. And it's all about engaging people, engaging the local community to find out what assets they have that we can leverage on. We draw inspiration from possibly the history of the space and what we can do with that space. And ultimately, it's aimed at promoting people's health, happiness, and well-being. So yeah, so if you're ever wondering what makes for a great space, there are 4 elements that we usually look at. So the first one is on the sociability aspects. Then we look at users, how people use the space, what kind of activities happen there. Comfort in terms of whether it's clean, it's safe, and then access and linkages through public transport, walkability, and so forth. So I'll just dive a little bit into that. So when we talk about sociability, really, the words that we've put there are essentially the intrinsic feeling that you get when you are in a public space. Does it feel welcoming? Who is managing it? Does it give a sense of cooperation there? Is there this feeling of neighborliness? Okay, and all these things can actually be tracked. Placemaking is not something that is just a series of activities or just a design thing. It actually has a trickle-down impact, and you can actually measure these things in terms of who's using the space, when are they using it, what happens during the day, what happens at night, what kind of street life does it have. And when we look at users, so when you go to a place, is it fun? Is it special? Do you feel special there? Is it a space that's useful, that's part of your daily life? And you can track that through how many local businesses are there, how the property values. So generally, when we talk about property values, the more vibrant a space, the better it is. It attracts more people, that helps businesses and so forth. When we talk about comfort, it's really that feeling of safety. Green, does it have a lot of trees, a lot of shade? Is it walkable? How are the sidewalks? Are they interconnected? Are they easily traversable? And sometimes even, does it give you a sense that the space feels charming or attractive? And usually we track this against things like crime statistics. So simple things like lighting, for example, so if you go to a public space and it's very dark, then naturally it sort of attracts a lot of crime of opportunity in a sense. We can look at sanitation ratings to track cleanliness. Do the buildings feel new, old, worn down, and so forth? And in terms of access and linkages, this is really, in terms of proximity to other amenities, other facilities. Is it easy to travel to them? Is the place walkable? Is it convenient to get to? And is it connected to public transportation systems? Or we're going to talk about micro-mobility options as well. So we can look at this in terms of traffic data, transit usage in terms of how many people go to the train station, pedestrian activity, what times, and so forth. So right now, when we talk about the new norm for placemaking, or at least visiting spaces, what's interesting is that how you sort of perceive the space will determine whether you want to go there or not. And it's very simple. I mean, if you went to an office building and you press the lift button and the lift doors open and someone's coughing in front of you, it's very easy to sort of create that sense of fear. And you'll question whether you want to go back to that space again because, you know, the pandemic definitely has some sort of impact in terms of whether you get infected or not. But interestingly enough, just to share a recent survey results that came out by YouGov, Malaysians are actually not averse to going out, and they are also not averse to gathering in large crowds. So what we can take from this is that Malaysians, I think more than any of the other respondents in the ASEAN countries, were sort of much more sociable, much more willing to experience the outdoors and so forth. So what are some of the trends which we are talking about that's of concern during this time? Essentially, one of the things will be self-policing and community policing in that sense. So one example could be there's a shopping mall that has recently added in, their security guards have sort of been trained to remind people to make sure that, you know, they practice social distancing, they wear their face mask, for example. And in terms of the design of public space, will we see, you know, more wash basins at our parks, more public toilets, for example, so people can go and wash their hands? Or will the sizes of parks change? Because now suddenly we're looking at capacity. One example that just happened recently is that they just, you know, during the CMCO, they opened Tiwangsel Park, and then they are going to close it because too many people were visiting it. Then we're also looking at how people use those spaces. One simple example would be, you know, when you go jogging, you have your jogging path. Now, given that, you know, we all have to practice social distancing, does this mean that the paths are going to be wider? You know, our sidewalks, 5-foot walkway, is that going to be wider as well? Just so that we can accommodate the number of people using that space, whilst at the same time maintaining some kind of social distance. Then our changing preferences and expectations for green or open space will also create new design thinking, I suppose, that how we do in terms of the path, for example, parking, access, connectivity. These are some of the areas that we're looking at. In terms of retail or commercial activity, I mean, as businesses go through the challenges of the pandemic, we should see more empty or shuttered spaces. Now, the problem is that these things can create an imagery or feel that the area is derelict. So it's also quite important that if you were the remaining businesses there, that, you know, there's some action taken to ensure that there's a feeling of liveliness there, the space is still alive in that sense. So streets, again, so when we talk about increasing the width of sidewalks, for example, does that mean that the space available for cars has to be reduced? So that's an interesting topic that a lot of people are discussing right now. And even when we talk about sidewalks, for example, online shopping has become very popular. Home food delivery has become a huge thing during the pandemic. And you'll definitely see a lot of delivery riders congregated near food shops, for example. Just the other day, you know, at a fast food outlet, there were easily 7-8 delivery riders congregated around the space. So it does give you an impact in the sense that, you know, is it safe? Is it not? Should I go there? Should I not? And, you know, that's one area which we're also considering. Then the other one is on this idea of micro-mobility and sharing activities. So things like, for example, in the US, they actually had a store or a brand that was where you were able to rent power tools instead of owning them. But because, you know, the pandemic has happened, COVID-19 can stay on certain surfaces for quite a number of hours. How does that impact your feeling towards using those items, for example? Do you feel comfortable doing it? Do you feel confident that it has been cleaned enough, and you're more than happy to use it? Interestingly enough, usually these shared activities generally result in the cost being lower. So I mean, there's an offset. The economic activity is down. People are more careful with their money. So shared services can be something that they tap into, but yet at the same time, they have to be concerned with the safety aspects of using those things. So yeah, so I'm just going to share some fun pictures of what some people are doing around the world. This is a cafe in Germany where they've attached these poles on everyone's head to sort of ensure that you're within that 1 meter gap. Yeah, for shopping malls, for example, atriums used to be the congregation point for a lot of people to share a lot of the events that were happening there. But given that we have to keep our distance, so you can see an example here where they spaced out the chairs, which still allows people to enjoy the space, yet at the same time provides some measure of physical distancing. This was for a rave that happened in Germany as well. So what happened is that everybody drives in their cars, and then you're able to enjoy the concert without actually leaving the safety of your car. And what's interesting is that we can't go to the cinema anymore. So does this mean that one day we will go back in time to the days where we had drive-in cinema, for example? So these are just interesting ideas and how people around the world are adapting to this change in space. So the biggest question that we're all asking right now is that will these changes be permanent or temporary? So it really depends on how far or how long the pandemic is going to be a part of the world in that sense. Because if it's going to take a longer duration, then we might as well start planning to make these ideas permanent now. Otherwise, we'll just be doing something temporary. And the concern is that, what happens when the next pandemic happens, for example. So these are sort of the balance discussion that a lot of placemakers are having right now. So yeah, so that's my presentation. And yes, feel free to ask any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Imran. Very interesting. There is a question from Leonard Mark. How could we bring the public's involvement in designing our cities? And what role can other parties play in creating an impact in our urban design when collaborating with you?
Okay, so the public's involvement, of course, is very important, especially if they're the ones, if that is the community that's using the space the most. So it's definitely very important to get their opinion, even to understand how they use that space, when they use that space, for example. I'm recalling a project, that Pink City did where which we were involved in some way to upgrade back lanes, for example. And through the upgrade, the idea is to upgrade it. They could have, the local council, DBK at the time, could have just said, I'm just going to upgrade it however I want. But I think the process, what made it unique and what made it special is that they actually spoke to all the business owners where the back shop is where the back lane is, and involve them in the process. Ask them what time they do their deliveries, how do they use the space, are there any issues with crime at night? Is it well lit? Is it not? And through that series of engagements, I think they did about 2 or 3 engagements. Then they have a much better idea of how people use their space, and they tailor make the design, the final design to that feedback. So when people are involved in the process, the thinking is that you are more likely to be, considerate of it. You are more likely to take care of it. That's very important. I think too many times we see a very much down approach where the park suddenly upgraded, and then but you don't feel any sort of connection to that space because you're not involved in any way other than just being a user in a sense of that space. So what role can parties play is that if you see a space that you want to, that you feel needs a so-called intervention in a sense, you can always talk to a local council, you can always gather together local businesses and see, it's just about talking to people, sharing that vision that you have for that space, and then working together to see how you can sort of make that transformation.
Who have to play this role? I think this kind of concept will need public-private partnership, right? So both the private sector and the public sector will have to play roles uh, because it will involve both the public and the private sector.
Yeah, so there are various models that we've seen around the world, for example. So like in Singapore, they have this thing called BIDS, which is the Business Improvement District Scheme. So what happens is that the businesses within a particular area all contribute a little bit of money, for example, for extra security, extra cleaning services. And what the local authority does is they work as a facilitator to that process. So that's one example, as you rightly pointed out, of private and sort of public partnership coming together. But we've also seen programs where it's just one company coming in to do changes to a public space. It could even be coming in to enhance the vibrancy of a library, for example. The libraries are not exactly the most visited space now because everything is available online. So it's about how can we adapt that to have multiple serve different functions for different groups of people and so forth. So even an individual, you can actually make an impact. If you look at the sidewalk, it's not even, or there's potholes and things like that. Feel free to always contact your local authority and just raise awareness that these things need to sort of change in a sense.
Okay, when you want to embark on this placemaking, what kind of costs actually you have to be prepared, to spend?
Oh, okay. There's no real cost that you have to go for. There's a lot of material online that you can read. There are courses that you can attend. For example, like I've attended one called City and Eye Level, which is really about how you perceive the space from the road level and what sort of changes can happen, or you can look at in terms of impacting how people use sidewalks, the roads, the cars, parking, and so forth. So there's no real degree course that you can go for. A lot of placemaking is just common sense. If the space is dark, just put in lights, and then people, you can actually impact crime statistics that way. So a lot of it is common sense.
Not cost. I was talking about cost.
Cost, okay. If you're looking at cost, placemaking doesn't have to be expensive. When you look at infrastructure upgrades, yes, those are usually borne by local authorities. But if you want to do short-term temporary activations, Project for Public Spaces has this motto called lighter, quicker, cheaper. So it's just about doing small things, and that can have a sort of big impact in terms of the vibrancy of the space. For example, putting in chairs for people to sit down wherever they want in that space. That doesn't have to be an expensive thing. We are starting to see more murals in the city, for example. Yeah, so those don't have to be super expensive. Placemaking doesn't need to be a multi-million-dollar investment in that sense.
Who will bear this cost, by the way? Is it the developer, the local council, the government? So who actually is to bear the cost?
Yeah. Traditionally, we always rely on the local authority, to make sure that any space is at least clean, it's safe, and so forth. But right now, at this point in time, I think it's important that people have an element of uh, uh, responsibility, um, a feeling of ownership in that sense, to wherever it is that you are working or going to or using in terms of that space. So that feeling of ownership needs to really come out. Anyone can do it. It not necessarily, like I said, has to be solely on the local authorities' responsibility. Developers can also do this. So developers can do this in two parts. They can do it in terms of the design, where they can make the spaces much more pedestrian friendly. For certain areas, you can slow down traffic so that it's much more safer for pedestrians. It's more walkable. It's really about the interconnectiveness with other components in that development as well. It's about safety, making sure that lighting is sufficient in that sense. So there's a lot of things. So developers can do that on the design side, and yet they can also do that on the activation side. So once before you hand over to the JMB, for example, you can have courses with them, sit down and plan out. Guys, how do we ensure that the vibrancy of the space continues even after our involvement has ended? In that sense, even after they've handed over to a JMB, for example, the developer can still play a role, because ultimately, whatever building they've done carries their name. So this project is done by developer XYZ, for example.
So you are saying placemaking can also be a commercial venture for the developers. Commercially,
yeah. The goal is not really to make money, but placemaking does provide positive economic impact in terms of capital appreciation. So people feel that you want to spend your time in a place that's vibrant. When the public space is vibrant, officers want to move there. Commercial activity is very vibrant as well. So people feel that that is a space that, if I was to invest a certain amount of money, the people who work for me will enjoy it. The chances of doing well is better, for example. So capital appreciation increases. So if I was a township developer and I was doing multiple phases, it would be important to make sure that the first phase was very successful in terms of being vibrant. There was a lot of commercial activity. People wanted to go there. And then it will make selling the consequent phases, easier. And it really adds value to all the people who live in that area, in a township, for example.
So do you consider then that a golf course can be a placemaking thing? Because that's what developers did in the past. They built a golf course and they built houses around it, which create value, enhance the value of the properties. So golf course can be placemaking also, right?
It depends. If it was very exclusive, then I would argue it would be much harder. I won't say it's impossible, but very difficult, because one of the key principles of placemaking is that it's inclusive. So, as you know, golf courses are not exactly huge money-making ventures anyway. There are quite a number of golf courses that have not done well at all. And part of that reason is because, when you create that sort of feeling that it's exclusive, it's only limited to this group of people, then nobody else has any attachment to that space at all.
Can you give any example of placemaking which we can see in KL? This is a question from Geraldine, by the way.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so just take a simple one. So if you go down to Petaling Street, for example, so there are a lot of changes which are happening in Petaling Street. It's a downtown area that has sort of not had a lot of love and attention, but DBKL, you have bodies like DBKL, Pink City are really putting an effort to sort of transforming that space. Chandana is doing things there as well. And it's you start to see more murals. You're starting to see the rejuvenation of back lanes, for example. The challenge is that KL has a huge daytime population, and that particular downtown area at night does not. So after people finish work, they go home. So it's also about making sure there's activities happening at night, and you can see there's a lot of things happening there. If you go and check out some of the back lanes, normally you wouldn't tell people, hey, go and check out the back lane, for example. It's not really a destination that you would normally invite people to go to. But Think City have done a great job with places like Lorong Bandar 13, and they even host things like Backlane Cinema. There's a movie night that happened there semi-regularly, and there's a lot of events that sort of happen there as well. So yeah,
there's another question.
That's a very good example.
Yeah, that's another question from Leonard. Thank you, Imran. What are the challenges you typically face that we have to take note of if we'd like to start an initiative? And take, for example, the addition of bike lanes in KL. How can we continue this great initiative?
Okay, so the bike lanes in KL is a very involved program, in the sense that you really need to go and start talking with the local authority and getting engaged with them. And what you realize is that most cities have been designed for cars, especially you go to KL. They never really were. Bike lanes were sort of an afterthought in that sense. So it's a bit challenging in terms of how do we incorporate this into the existing streets of KL. It's definitely something that's interesting. It's slowly happening. But my advice is, if you are going to do an initiative, always start with something easy first, something local, specific to a local community, and just start from there. Because it's much easier for you to gain confidence when you do a small project, and then it takes off. You manage to build some momentum from there. You build trust with the stakeholders in that area, and then sort of going step by step to go on to bigger and bigger things. Because if you start at a big objective, it's going to be very challenging. You just focus on that for quite a number of time.
Okay, I have a question for you. With the new normal, social distancing is a given. So how would this impact on efforts to create and promote a communal concept such as placemaking, which actually requires people to convene in large numbers at one place?
Yeah. Okay. So one example would be, so that's an issue of capacity right now. We are starting to see that even in F&B outlets. Whenever you invest in an F&B outlet, you have a certain number of tables. Table turnaround is how you measure your ROI. Now you can only have 2 people per table, and that it does sort of impact in terms of the price and so forth. Now, when it comes to congregating, yes, placemaking has generally been about how do we get large groups of people into one space and they can use that space. But we can also consider things like staggering use. We can look at things like incorporating more digital placemaking, just to drive that sense of engagement. So, for example, you can still run digital surveys. You can still have a website which lists down all the number of activities that's happening in the space. Of course, with all the rules required for social distancing. So there's no hard and fast rule that says that placemaking is only about large crowds. It's really about the engagement between people and how we can help different groups of stakeholders inside there.
Okay. Another question. In temperate climate, placemaking can be outdoor without a sweat, pardon the pun. But in our kind of climate, how can this be successfully implemented, assuming indoor will just be too costly, with the prerequisite air conditioning and again social distancing measures and so on?
Yeah, we don't have to have everything doesn't need to be covered in that sense, but definitely we can incorporate things like shade. Not everything has to be air conditioned in that sense, but I think the shade, the protection from the elements. One of the areas which has always got a lot of debate is our bus stops. and how those bus stops are designed. So they have, very simple roof, and yet when it rains, everybody inside there still, gets wet in that sense. So we always look at those things. Shade is primarily one of the best things, I think, for temperate climate. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, for example, you go to London, a lot of people actually go to Hyde Park. That is where they spend their weekends. But in Malaysia,
Yep.
we spend our weekends in the shopping malls because of the air conditioning. We don't get to spend time, in the park or outside, basically.
Well, there are a lot of people who visit KLCC Park on weekends. Children, when you're going to school-going children, for example, will be going to the Padang and play football. Where sometimes whether it's hot or whether it rain, also they'll still go and play.
No, those are children. They don't.
Like I said, placemaking is for everybody. It's really about how different groups of people use a particular space. So there's no hard and fast rule to say that just because we're a tropical country, everybody just only wants to be indoors. There are a lot of people who use outdoor space, so we can also design to accommodate that those groups of people as well.
Okay, Imran. Actually, we are supposed to go live only for half an hour, but we are already past 35 minutes already.
No worries.
Anything else you want to add, maybe?
Yeah, just I suppose in closing is that placemaking is something that everyone should be aware of, and realize that any individual can make an impact. Any individual can do it. It's really the feeling, the sense of ownership that you have for that space, and then the will to just do it.
Okay, for everyone who has tuned in, actually, both me and Imran will be doing another webinar on this topic that will be in the Ian Scott International Future of Real Estate webinar series, which will be on the 8th of June. So stay tuned. I think there's nothing else, and I have a call coming in.
No worries.
So I think we bid farewell to everyone, and see everyone again in the next Shine at 9 to be hosted by our pretty Geraldine again, right? Okay.
Thank you for having me. Thanks and good night, everyone.
Okay. Bye.